Atlantic Slave Trade by Zach Bluebond, Austin Wang, Griffin Larson, and Sidney Paget. Atlantic Slave Trade. The economic expansion of Western Europe and throughout the 18th century led to an increase in demand for labor in the Americas. Before 1700, European states waged war through monopolist trading companies to gain control of African slave exports. After 1700, England was the undisputed leader of the slave trade. Africans gained little to no profit and products in return for the slaves. Raiding parties into interior kidnapped men and women. Continued. The European empires that sought to explore and colonize territories in the New World also attempted to forge lucrative commercial networks in the Atlantic littoral, the regions that touched the Atlantic Ocean. Gradually, a triangle trade came to define the Atlantic world. Ships departed from Europe, sailed to western Africa to trade, embarked to the Caribbean and South America to sell slaves, and then returned to Europe, laden with New World produce. Slaves for the transatlantic slave trade were initially sourced in Senegambia and the Windward Coast. Part 3. Although the trade routes often varied, Western Africa remained as an important destination for European traders who bought and sold gold, ivory, cloth, and African slaves. For 200 years, 1440 to 1640, Portugal had a monopoly on the export of slaves from Africa. It is notable that they were also the last European country to abolish the institution, although, like France, it still continued to work former slaves as contract laborers, which they called libertos or engagés à temps. It is estimated that during the 4.5 centuries of transatlantic slave trade, Portugal was responsible for transporting over 4.5 million Africans, roughly 40% of the entire total. Significance of the Atlantic slave trade. Slaves were introduced to new diseases, and suffered from malnutrition long before they reached the New World. It is suggested that the majority of deaths on the voyages across from the Atlantic, the Middle Passage, occurred during the first couple of weeks and were a result of malnutrition and disease encountered during the forced marches and subsequent internment at slave camps on the coast. Slaves sold to labor in coffee, tobacco, cocoa, cotton and sugar plantations, gold and silver mines, rice fields, construction industry, cutting timbers for ships, and even as house servants. This picture portrays the journey that the manufactured goods sent from Europe to Africa take and the slaves that are sent from Africa. Revival in Latin America. Charles II died in 1700, and the last Habsburg, Louis XIV's grandson, Philip V, brought new men and fresh ideas from France. He rallied the Spanish behind the Bourbon dynasty in the War of Spanish Succession. He revitalized Madrid. Spanish colonies succeeded in defending themselves from British attacks. Silver mining recovered, and Spain grew to be the second largest producer. Gained Louisiana from France for silver mining. Creoles were people of Spanish blood born in America. They became wealthy and controlled land and debt. Peonage, rancher and planters, keep Indians in debt bondage, a form of serfing. Mestizos, offspring of Spanish men and Indians, diverse Brazil and South America. Continued from revival in Latin America. Middle-class mestizos, offspring of Spanish men and Indian women. Some joined the Creoles. Enough makes one white only, 20%, 30% mestizo. Indians were the remainder and some slaves. 1/2 of Brazil population in early 19th century was black. Spanish and Portugal colonies developed growing commerce in silver, sugar, slaves, and manufactured goods for the Europeanized elites. In this picture, you see the U.S. under the process of colonization. The decline. Shiploads of African slaves never landed in northwest Europe. Cheap labor abounded there, only as personal slaves. Unions between blacks and whites were not uncommon. After 1775, campaigns to abolish slavery developed in England. First peaceful, mass political movement based on mobilization of public opinion. 1807, Parliament abolished British slave trade. Alauda Equiano. He was kidnapped with his sister when he was only 11 years old. He kept journals of the horrors of the long ship journey to Barbados. He was then sold to a Royal Navy officer in England, who gave him some education. Equiano knew that slavery was illegal in England, but he was sent away to the Caribbean. He was sold to Robert King, and worked on his math skills and became King's first mate. He was allowed to trade on his own profit, and repaid King his original purchase for the price of the freedom. He fled to England and studied while working as a hairdresser. He wrote interesting narrative which talked about treating blacks as equal and led to many movements to abolish slavery in England and Ireland. Adam Smith and economic liberalism. English merchants complained about injustice of exclusive trading rights to combines such as the East India Company called for free trade. Adam Smith, who lived from 1723 to 1790, wrote the Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. Critical of mercantilism, stifling government regulations and unfair privileges for monopolies. Economic liberalism opposes government intervention on the ground that the state often serves dominant business interests, distorting the market to their favor and thus leading to inefficient outcomes. Adam Smith continued, "Free competition best protects consumers from price gouging and gave all citizens fair and equal right. System of natural liberty, government should only provide defense, maintain law and order, and sponsor certain public works. Applauded rise in wages from British workers. Pursuit of self-interest in competitive market created certain harmony. Invisible hand increases both wealth of rich and poor. Economic liberalism and unregulated capitalism." Part 3 of Adam Smith. Smith provided the first theoretical framework for classical political economy. The notion of political economy was invented at this time. Smith's work was not wholly original in its content, but combined the ideas and thinking of many before him, and set out his analysis and explanation of the process of political economy. Economic liberalism opposes economic planning as an alternative to the market mechanism, and also generally opposes mixed economies. Economic liberalism contrasts with social liberalism, as well as other economic orders such as socialism, market socialism, the social market economy, mercantilism, and state capitalism. According to Smith's ideology, if the capitalist economy is to develop, society must encourage free competition and against the state intervention in economic activities. This idea, before Smith, 17th to 18th century, had been around for a number of advanced bourgeois thinkers. Smith inherited and developed that previous idea, in theory, the economic freedom to fully demonstrate the basic principles of an ideology of a laissez-faire, and accordingly established the principle of a complete system of classical political economy, thus becoming the father of classical economics. Key area of Smith's work. His analysis is of the importance of specialization, often referred to as the division of labor. The invisible hand, the notion that within the economic sphere mankind is motivated, broadly speaking, by a desire for gain. Adam Smith explained the glory and some of the pitfalls of the economic system of capital production, and the role of trade in this theoretical change is a product of historical content. Portrayed here as a political cartoon.